All right.
And me? All right.
Thanks everybody for coming. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah. I'm Jeff Weir. I'm a user experience designer at Microsoft Live Labs, and I worked on Pivot.
My name is Troy Shawls. I'm a program manager in Live Labs, and I also worked on Pivot. So let's start with a brief show of hands. How many of you guys here would consider yourselves to be developers? Wow. Okay.
That's a lot.
How many of you guys would consider yourselves to be designers? All right, a lot too. How many of you guys would consider yourselves to be IT folks or data architects? Anybody? How many of you guys are all of the above but only get paid for one?
Well, that's good because we have a presentation broken into parts for all three types. We're going to talk about developing and building the collections, designing them, and then how to deploy them. And so with that, here's Troy to start it off.
So rather than diving into what Pivot is, let's talk about what Pivot is for first. Pivot is really about two, I guess what we'd call meta scenarios. The first one of which is really, we call explore and expire, or explore and inspire, different thing altogether. This one's really about following your curiosities. As we say, it's really about moving through a large set of data and exploring hidden or nuanced relationships. And then lastly, it's about extracting new insights from familiar data. The next meta scenario is a little more focused. It's a little more task-based. It's what we call navigate and act. This one is really about finding a needle in a haystack, finding that one piece of data of interest in a large set of data, or finding a few smaller pieces of data that are of interest, comparing them, and then it's about making a decision or taking some kind of action based on what you see. And so without further ado, let's actually go through a demo. So just another show of hands, how many of you guys have actually seen Pivot before, besides at the keynote today? Oh, quite a few of you. So I'm actually going to get to show you something new today, and that is Pivot for the web. Many of you guys who have seen Pivot have asked for Pivot to be brought to Silverlight, and we've done exactly that. What you're seeing here is an early daily build. This is actual working code. It's not production level, but we're getting there. And what I want to do first, actually, is just show you a pretty large collection. There's more than, this is a collection of all of the, or almost all of the Sports Illustrated covers that have ever been produced. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through a lay of the land here. So in Pivot, we've got the top area here. This is what we call the title bar. We've got the collection title. We've got a way to resort what you see in the view below. We've got the view switcher buttons here. Currently, this is grid view. We've also got a histogram view. And then lastly, we've got our zoom slider. And this is how you can actually just zoom right into the collection. This area here is what we call the collection viewer, and this is obviously where all of the items in the collection are. And you can zoom in. You can zoom back out. And then over on the left-hand side here, it's actually, yeah, that's right, your left. On the left-hand side, we have the filter pane. And this is where you can actually start drilling into the collection, for example. So I can see just the covers that have football, basketball, and baseball on the cover. I can also look at just a particular set of featured athletes. So, for example, if you can believe it, Michael Jordan was on the cover 58 times. I can see all of those for basketball and baseball. We can even, if we're feeling snarky, we can look at the Tiger Woods covers. I can also, for example, sort it just by date. So we can see just the covers from the 1970s. We can switch to histogram view. We can then see it sorted by each year in that decade. And we can even go further and sort it just by that year, so we can get down to the month level simply by exploring through Pivot that way. You can select a cover and bring up what we call the info pane. Now, this is actually where you can see more details about a collection. You can see the name of about an item. You can see the name of the particular item you're looking at. You can also see more filters, and these are filters that apply to this particular item. But just like the filter pane on the left, if you select baseball, for example, it will zoom out, and you can see now we're back to all of the covers across the decades that have baseball on them. So that's a general lay of the land of Pivot. I want to show you a couple of other more task-oriented demos, and this is actually one that we did in conjunction with the Silverlight team, with SharePoint 2010, and with the Associated Press. And this is actually a business intelligence-focused demo. We've had a number of partners who have come to us and have been really interested in using Pivot for business intelligence. So we thought, let's actually see if we can make this real, and let's see what it looks like and what it feels like. And this is kind of a first stab at that. This is, by the way, this is not something that the Associated Press has in production. This is something that we produced with them. This, again, simply a pilot. But that said, imagine you were a content curator and you were developing, say, an Oscars collection that you might actually publish to the Windows Phone experience that we saw earlier in that AP app. One of the things that, of course, you're going to want to see, for example, is how well your collections are doing, or how well your images and your content are doing. So, for example, we can filter it down. Let's just say we want to see all of the best actors and actresses in this collection since about 1990. And we can also look at just the most viewed collections, or excuse me, the most viewed images, and then even drill in further and see, for example, the most or the least viewed images. So we can see that Nicole Kidman is actually the least downloaded image there. The most downloaded image in that case, we've got, in that particular range, there's Hilary Swank and Jack Nicholson. Another BI scenario in the same vein is really one that we did with a BI partner named Extended Results, who are here, by the way. They'll also be with us out in the Commons later for questions if you have any. We also did this with a company called Zoomies, and for those of you who aren't familiar, I have to get this right. They are a mall-based action sports retailer. They have more than 300 stores all across the country. They sell things like snowboards and skate decks, shoes, accessories, clothes, all the accoutrements for those kinds of sports. And what we did here is kind of imagine the kind of thing that you would want to use if you're a buyer for Zoomies. And so, for example, one of the things that you always want to see if you're a buyer is your sales volume. So even here right away, we can go right into the Pivot experience, and we can sort everything by sales volume now. We've got everything color-coded, so you can tell at a distance, you can just get a general feel for how your particular items are selling. But what if, for example, you want to select a particular store? Alderwood Mall is a store that's actually very close to their headquarters in Everett. It's actually also very, very close to Seattle. So I can go in and see just the things that are selling in that particular store. And then I can even say, for example, I can see, let's look at just the beanies that are selling well, or that are selling it all in that particular store. And then I can even drill in further and say, let's look at the low-selling items. And so, for example, now I can also drill in further on a particular item, and I can see an infographic here which tells me over time my relation of sales to my inventory levels. Now, again, this was really kind of a pilot project, a thought experiment, not something in production, but we think it holds a lot of promise as a really great visual alternative to a report generator, a very static, something that's a very old experience. You allow your business intelligence users to, maybe for the first time, test all these hypotheses right there on the fly. They never have to talk to any guys. Sorry if you're a report writer. This may be bad news for you, not on purpose. So that's really it for the demos. Let's go back to the slides. So how does it work? So one of the things you really have to understand about Pivot is it's an extremely data-driven user experience, probably more so than you've ever seen in the past. And what that means is the quality of your data really counts. And that's for both the metadata, which you saw, all of the filters and all of the values and all the attributes of all the items in the collection. It's really important that that be clean and that be complete. And then second of all, another thing to understand is even though this is a new kind of experience, it's not actually very intimidating because really all it is a big bunch of files. And we're going to show you exactly what that means in a second. But really, it's really three kinds of XML, which is the first kind is the CXML, and that is really that's the collection metadata. So that's going to be the biggest file that contains all of the values for all of the items in the entire collection. The second type is a deep zoom collection, and that actually contains references to all of the pyramids all the deep zoom pyramids. For those of you who don't know, Pivot actually uses deep zoom technology, much like you guys have seen earlier today already. And then also, each deep zoom collection refers to a set of DZIs, or pyramids as we oftentimes call them for short. And a pyramid is something, actually I'm going to show you an example of that in just a second. And then lastly, it actually creates a lot of files. And we're going to talk more at the end about some survival tips for generating collections. So it's probably handy to take a look at what a Pivot collection looks like on the disk. So up in the top left there, we've got a directory that actually has the collection itself, the entire collection. We've got the CXML file, which is, again, the metadata file. That, in turn, points to, in the directory below it, as you can see if you actually look in the title bar of the Explorer screenshots there, that actually points to a deep zoom collection, which refers to all of the pyramids, the total, that refers to the complete set of pyramids, the deep zoom pyramids for that collection. That deep zoom collection, in turn, points to a set of DZIs, which you can see there, and each DZI, in turn, points to a set of directories which contain all the levels in the pyramid. And I think we have a visual later to help you see the big picture. We realize it's sort of complicated, but it's kind of illustrative just to see that it's actually just a tree of files. And then at each level of the pyramid, there is a set of tiles for a particular image. So just briefly, so in case you guys aren't aware how deep zoom actually works and how Pivot works is at each level of zoom, as I zoom in, I'm actually seeing a bigger and bigger set of tiles. And so what Pivot does at runtime is it takes this set of fragments and it composites them into a complete image. And it does that at several different levels. In this case, I think there's actually 11 different levels. And really, here's how it works. So for both, I guess what we affectionately call Big Pivot and Little Pivot, they both work exactly the same way. Over HTTP, what happens is the client actually just requests that CXML file, and I'm going to go through this in more detail in a second. But then all of that stuff that I just showed you goes over the wire via HTTP into the client. And there's a few things that are loaded up front. For example, the CXML is actually loaded up front before the collection is shown, and the DZC is actually loaded right after that. Everything else is loaded just in time, in case you're curious. So kind of starting at the bottom of the stack, here's what, this is actually only a DZC. There's a mistake in the slide, but it's really just an XML file. And what it is it's a collection at the outside of items. Each item points to, again, a set of directories with those image pyramids. So in the last example, we saw a picture of, I think it was actually a papillon. Yeah. A dog, a small French dog, the picture, the directory that was full of the tiles. And then in CXML, there's actually a few more parts. We've got the XML header, we've got the collection container, we've got a set of facet categories, and those are you can really think of these as the classes or the types of the metadata that you're going to be showing in the collection. We've also got a collection of items, and then you'll see there that in the image-based property of attribute of the item, that's where it points to the DZC file. And then we've got each individual item, which has a name, and then there's also an image property, and that references a particular index in the DZC file. How are we doing here, you guys? Making sense? Yeah? Okay. And then we've got a collection of facets or values for that particular item for that particular facet type. So this is actually really, really abstract, and I totally get that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break it down for you, and I'm going to show you where each of those attributes and each of these major parts of the CXML file actually go and where they're surfaced visually in the Pivot experience so you understand what maps to what. So in the first, we have the collection container. The collection container has a couple of attributes. It has a brand image, and that's the thing that will go in the top left corner, as you can see there, of the collection. Now, the Silverlight version doesn't have that in it yet, but it will. And that's a great way to customize your collection. And we've also got the name attribute in the collection, and that actually obviously names the collection. We've also got the list of facet categories. Those also have names, and they correspond to the elements the list that you see, the accordion that you see in the filter pane on the left. One thing to note here is that the order of the facet categories completely affects the order of the display in the filter pane itself. So it's really important that you give some thought, and Jeff's going to talk more about this, but it's really important that you give some thought as to how the order in which those things appear. And then, of course, we've got the collection of items, which you've seen, and then that sort of completes the big picture. Those are really the big four areas. Now let's talk about the facet definitions. The facet definition, if you remember, again, is really a class or a type of metadata. So in each facet definition, we have a name, and it's, in this case, position. It will display as position. We've also got whether it's word wheel visible. And so one thing I didn't show you, but one thing that is possible in both Big Pivot and Little Pivot is you can do a full text search. So for example, I can go right to somebody's name simply by typing it in as a text filter. And this controls whether the values for that particular facet definition are visible in that kind of a text search. You've also got control whether a particular facet appears as a filter or simply in the info pane when the item is highlighted. Now, one of the things that Jeff's going to talk about is kind of the sweet spot for the number of filters, because there really is a sweet spot, as we've learned. And so the thing to notice here is really that you have a whole lot of control over where things appear in the Pivot experience simply with these properties, because they're not mutually exclusive. They're true by default, and so you can actually have a particular filter or a particular a facet category be in both places, in neither places, or in both. So the facet type. The facet type actually is really important because it controls how the user interacts with that particular kind of data. So for example, if your type is a string, it will give you a list of checkboxes there, and you saw how you actually can select those one at a time or two at a time. The next type is a number, and the number actually acts as a range slider, and so you can go on one end, you can go on the other end, you can go in the middle, and you can slide it anywhere in between. There's a lot of interesting things you can do just with that type. I'm just going to show you more about that. You can also control the format. We use .NET format strings, as you can see there, and it's really great for things like weights and measures. So the next type is date, and if you have a set of items that have a date as a facet, and you specify that they are a date and not a string, for example, basically the pivot filter pane will go ahead and bucket all of those dates for you. So in this case, it's all bucketed simply by decade on the top, and then by individual year at the bottom. That's all done for you automatically based on the values that occur for that facet definition or that facet category in that collection. So you don't actually have to do anything to make that happen. And then the last type is a link. Now, links are kind of special because they only ever appear in the info pane on the right. Links are really handy because they allow you to specify an href, for example, so you can show more about a particular item in your collection. So, like, take Guy's Golden Langur, for example. It occurs in 2 countries, in Bhutan and India. Not everybody knows where Bhutan is. So, for example, what we actually did in this collection is we linked it out to the Bing map for Bhutan. So when the user selects it, they can go right to where that is on the map and see exactly what Bhutan looks like, where it is. So next, let's talk about the items themselves. Here we've got Robert De Niro, and there's the name, and that ends up at the top. When the item is selected, that ends up at the top of the filter, of the info pane. We've also got a description. We've got an image reference, and this is the place where you reference a particular item in the deep zoom collection. So you reference a particular pyramid. You say this pyramid goes with this item in the collection, and that's how Pivot knows what to show. And then we've also got an href property on the item itself. So for example, there's an open button that appears overlaid on the item, but the user can also double click on Robert De Niro, for example, and they would be taken to Robert De Niro's celebrity page on MSN.com, for example. There's also another interesting use for that href property, and that is you can link collections together. So in this particular example, you can specify that when the user double clicks, they'll actually go to a different related collection. And this is actually something that we really did. The AMG collection that we have at getpivot.com today will allow you to browse both actors and their movies. They're actually totally separate collections, but they're all completely interlinked, and this is how we did it. So it's a great way to have collections that are essentially siblings or maybe first cousins of each other. It's a great way for the user to navigate between them. All right. So now that I've told you a little bit about how to make collections, Jeff is going to tell you how to make them great.
Thanks, Troy. At Live Labs, working on collections for the past 6 to 10 months, we've sort of developed a set of guidelines that we use. And I'll go through them. We have 5. And they're not hard and fast rules. They're not scripture or anything, but they certainly help us. And the first one might be the most important. And that's knowing your goals and your audience. Pretty much any decision or discussion or argument when you're working on the project can be answered by the goals and the audience. Is this color suitable? Well, who's your audience? Is this filter appropriate? Well, what are your goals? What are you trying to get done? And you'll see in the following steps that these keep coming up. Treating your content appropriately is, well, very appropriate. Content in Pivot breaks down into data or visuals. Now, if you want to make a good collection, you'll have a lot of visual content, maybe some data, or vice versa. But if you want to make a great collection, you want to have a lot of both. So let's talk about the visual part of it. In Pivot, we have, well, in Live Labs anyway, we call them trade cards. Very similar to a baseball trading card, where it's a visual element with data on it. And on a scale of few to many elements, you can have many treatments for a Pivot collection. So what if your collection doesn't actually have any visuals attached to it? It doesn't have any product shots. Well, you can make lemons out of lemonade. Lemonade out of lemons. In this case, we've mapped certain colors to categories. This was for an internal collection where we had 5 different color categories. Moving up the scale, maybe your content is just a set of photographs, in which case it doesn't make sense to adorn it with any type of information. That's appropriate for this type of collection. In our actors collection, we put only a little bit of data, in this case name tags. Again, the content is king. The content is the photographs in this case. That was appropriate. In our Winter Olympians collection, this is where it got a bit more in terms of details. What was appropriate for here was we wanted to create a visual style that implied winter. That's how we got the crystal look, the blue, the white. We also wanted to imply the sports with a little icon in the bottom left corner. Illustrating the country name was more important than the athlete's name, so that's why it's larger. And then we have a medal count down in the bottom right corner. And another decision that we had to make in terms of what was appropriate was that this had to work with black and white photos as well as color photos. Originally, we had a gold, silver, bronze theme, and that wasn't appropriate, so we canned it. And then on the extreme side is our new cars collection, where we have many elements. I'll get into that in a second. I'm not saying more is better or less is better. It's about what's appropriate. And there's such a thing as too much and then too little. In Pivot, if you don't give any visual information, you'll still get generic thumbnails up there, but it won't be as a compelling experience. And then on the flip side, we have my Halloween costume from last year. I was a fork. And that's way too much information. Just totally visually complex. So don't do that, and don't do that. Now, what's the difference between appropriate and typical? At first blush, it seems they're kind of the same thing, but they're not. Appropriate suits all the goals. Typical is what people are going to expect. So this is how we could have done the new cars collection. We've got the standard color palette of a luxury car website. We've got the lasers, the speed lines in the background. And then we have ours. And I've heard a couple of people say before that, wait, the other one looks better. And yes, it may, but it's not appropriate for what we were trying to do. We were trying to build a story with this collection. The story was, it's 2009, we're in a recession, people care about price, and people care about fuel efficiency. We're not trying to sell you after an expensive, lusty sports car or smart car. We're trying to create a story about you going to the dealership and getting little packets of information and having the price circled by Bob the dealer, making it more immersive, creating a story out of it. So in this case, this was an appropriate design. Oh, and one thing I'll mention too is that our source imagery for this collection was 100 by 100 pixel images of cars. So to make a deep zoom experience, we sort of had to build around the images. So there's a bit of abstraction going on there. Another thing, as we got into the details of the cars, all the circles are different. We randomized the circles. And this is the kind of detail that, will everyone notice it? No. But the people who do notice it a lot. And it's sort of like a treat. When they see something like that, they think, okay, the designer put a lot of time into this. What else did they put time into? And it's little things like these that hook people into your collection and make you want to explore it a bit more. Now that we've talked about the visuals, let's talk a bit about the data. I took a look at the Strangers, a Seattle weekly newspaper, their online personals. And they have a wealth of data. I don't know if anyone here works on an online personals site, but this seems like a ripe opportunity. In terms of their metadata, you could, if you were to make a collection of it, you could put one category on. Alternatively, you could make it a bit more interesting and add, I don't know, 7 to 10. And then you could go the other extreme and add everything. Now, what's appropriate for your content and what's appropriate for your audience? It may be that men and women is the only thing you need to filter by if you have a certain audience. Probably not, though. And then if your audience is looking for a 25 to 30-year-old, right-leaning, blonde, 5'4" person living in Capitol Hill who has children but doesn't want children, they're probably not going to find it in your collection or in life. And so you don't want to put too much in. It can be overwhelming. 7 to 10 facet categories is the sweet spot. It's enough that you can get immersed in the collection, you can find really interesting relationships between data, but it isn't overwhelming for the user. But again, know your audience. Maybe your audience needs 20 facets to find their soulmate. That being said, the info pane is a great spot to put all your data. You can have descriptions, you can have hyperlinks, you can have multi-value properties, you can put bios, you can have an automatic Bing search related to the item. That's toggleable, you can turn it on and off. Go wild with the info pane. It's sort of the back of the trade card when we use the trade card metaphor. And then going into a bit more detail on the date data is thinking about how your audience is going to filter the data. So if we were going by date, the most obvious choice is to use the built-in date facet. This buckets it by certain date properties, and it also allows you to be very specific. I can filter by July 4th to August 23rd if I want to. That's great for certain collections. But maybe your collection is art history, in which case dates, the specific date isn't that important. It's really about the years. So in this case, creating a numeric range slider where you can just set the years and go back and forth on that, that's appropriate. And then finally, maybe your audience doesn't think in terms of dates, but they think in terms of periods. So maybe they think in terms of music. So they don't know the date, but they know when those 5 teenage boys who danced their way into our hearts, the Backstreet Boys, they'd choose 90s boy bands. Formatting your numbers is also very specific and very doable with the .NET format strings. Know your audience. In this case, North American audience, this is a perfect number. If you're selling to Europeans, you'll want to switch the decimals or the period and the comma. What's appropriate? Now, this is maybe my favorite part in making a collection, and this is designing for distance. So in Pivot, things can be tiny, tiny little specks. They can be card sized when you're focused on them, and then they can be a really deep zoom. And so let's look at when they're tiny little specks. In aggregate, you lose a lot of the visual information. If you leave large color blocks on the trade cards, that's what shows up when you're all zoomed out like this. In this case, this is the endangered species collection, and we've mapped colors to the different classes. So we've got amphibians, birds, fish and eels, mammals. They all have their right color. It can make almost like a puzzle for the user in a good way to go through the data and see these relationships between colors and icons or what have you. If you get into larger items, let's say we have about 100 on the screen here, sometimes you can use a secondary element. In this case, we've got something in the top right corner that indicates the endangered status of the animals, where it goes from red to black, very endangered to almost extinct. You want to be careful with this, though. You want to limit it to 1 or 2. Beyond that, it's too much visual complexity. And try to keep it in major color blocks. And try to put cute things on, too. That helps. When we're at the focused level, that's when the info panel shows up on the right-hand side. Portrait, square, or landscape are all good ideas for layouts for your cards. We made a collection out of XKCD comics and Penny Arcade comics. And what we ran into there is extreme aspect ratios. And those get really squashed when you're looking at items up close. We recommend avoiding them. But sometimes you can't avoid that if your data is comic strips. However, putting them into trade cards sometimes helps. We want to avoid variable aspect ratios in a collection as well. So the way Pivot works is whatever the first item is, we'll take that, and then we'll make a grid based on that shape, and then everything fades in and fits to that grid. So if you have variable aspect ratios, you're going to have a lot of rivers and kind of unevenness. Try to at least get it close if you can. And now the fun part, deep zoom. This, as Troy mentioned, is the Papillon breed of dog. I recently learned Papillon is French for butterfly, and that's the orange shape on its head. It's a butterfly. And that's what you'd see if this was just a web page. But because we have deep zoom, and this is a rich, many megapixel image, we can zoom in to the eye of the dog and see the reflection of the photographer. It's like CSI. It's the killer reflected in the eye of the victim. But what if you don't have rich content? Well, again, life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. We gave rich adornments. A good reminder, too, is that Photoshop and Illustrator are not your only tools. Digital cameras are great. That's what I did here when I went to Cal Anderson Park in Seattle, took a photo of the turf grass, and now we have real turf on our trade cards. Another important thing for deep zoom is the information importance. When we first started designing trade cards, we were thinking like it was the web, where everything actually has to be actual size. So after playing with Pivot, we realized, no, if it's too much, just shrink it, make it smaller. And that's what we did with the maps on the endangered species cards. A good note about this, too, is that people aren't used to deep zoom yet. It isn't totally intuitive that I can just zoom into anything and there's a lot of rich content back there. So if you're designing collections, you want to provide things sort of as a hook or a lure in the bottom left or bottom right or wherever. Something that says, hey, there's more there. Maybe I can make it bigger. And that will encourage users to use the zoom slider or the mouse wheel even more. This is very applicable in the business intelligence scenarios as well. You can imagine all kinds of bar charts or infographics tucked away that may not be as important as the core information on the card, but still accessible if you want it. And it is against Microsoft policy to put Easter eggs in our products. If you work for Microsoft, I don't recommend this. But if you work for a company who does allow Easter eggs, Deep Zoom is a great opportunity for this. What kind of Easter eggs could we put in? Well, we could put the gentleman standing to my immediate left, Mr. Troy Schulz, in the crowd. I imagine you can think of many other opportunities for Deep Zoom. Now that we've got an idea of the framework of what the cards are going to look like, we got to make them. So as a show of hands here, who uses Photoshop or is in charge of people who have to use Photoshop? Okay, now of these people, who uses the data sets and variables feature? One person. Okay, then this is great. Take this back to your teams. The Photoshop data sets feature it allows you to give a tab delimited file to a template and batch produce data-driven graphics. This is immensely helpful. We had to create over 10,000 trade cards. These trade cards were average 3,000 by 5,000 pixels, and they were all different. It would have been impossible for us to do it by hand. So we used this method. Now, I'll acknowledge that there are other batch processing tools out there. ImageMagick is one. That's free. Image Converter does compositing on the fly. What we wanted, though, was a process that could fit within the design team. It would be entirely controlled by the designers. If someone had to design a file but then give it to someone else to produce, we could do that. That's why we use Photoshop. And there's a couple tricks to it. I won't go into detail here, but you can catch me at the Commons after the talk, and we can chat about this if you'd like. What do the data sets actually give me? They allow me to toggle a layer, an adjustment layer, a group, text layers, anything with a true-false statement. And that's how we did the labeling in the new cars collection. It also lets me insert images. And the great thing about this is if there are layer effects applied to the image, they're preserved. So drop shadows, outlines, what have you. And then finally, they allow me to replace text. You combine all these together, and you have awesome, awesome production tools. This lovely, lovely feature lives in the image variables define section in Photoshop. It's also available in the help system, and it's online in their online help system. Again, if you want to chat about it, come grab me after the talk. And then the last, the fun part, kind of fun part, is iterating. You'll never get the right collection on the first try. It's just the way Pivot works. You think something will work well, and then you realize it won't. Like that piece of data wasn't that useful. Vice versa, you're playing with a collection, and you realize, we should add that. And on our least amount of iterations, it took 7 tries to get the dogs collection. It's just the nature of any design project. So the more eyes you can get on it, and the sooner you can get customers' eyes on it to get their feedback, the better. So to step through the points, know your goals and audience, treat your content appropriately, design for distance, far away, close, deep zoom, automate your production, you'll save so much time, and iterate. Now that we know how to create a compelling collection, What do we do with them? Troy will tell you.
Thanks, Jeff. So how do you deploy these collections now that you know how to make them and make them great? The act of making a collection, depending on the scale of your data, depending on the diversity of your data, depending on where it's located, is a really complicated act, or it can be anyway. So what I'm going to do is instead talk about a couple of survival strategies or survival tips. The first of which has to do with the image pyramids. You guys saw earlier, the act of taking a whole high-resolution image and turning it into a pyramid, which is like what you see there. It literally is a set of tiles of increasing size at increasing levels of resolution. The act of doing that is actually pretty computationally intensive, and it makes a lot of files, and it makes a lot of size on disk. So what we recommend is imagine the universe of all the things you might possibly want to include in a collection, then create a process to batch ingest those, to build them, to catalog them. Chances are, if you have high-res images, or even if you have medium-res images, if you have some set of images that you use on the web or anywhere, you're going to have a catalog of those images. So what we suggest is taking those images, making them into pyramids, and then saving a reference to where those pyramids are located in the same place you would in your catalog. And this will become clear, a little clearer, I think, here in a second. And then as you bring new things into your system, just go ahead and make a step in your ingestion process or your check-in process, however you do it, to create a pyramid as that new image comes into the system, and then it's ready for use. And that really comes into play because there's kind of the second tip is really about two ways of generating collections. The first one is you can actually generate the CXML, which is the metadata, and the deep zoom collection, assuming you've taken care of number one, completely on the fly. In other words, if you have a small set of data, you can write some web server code to generate those XML files, and because, again, it's all handled over HTTP, you can generate them completely dynamically on the fly every single time they're requested. Another way to do it, if you have scale needs, is that you can treat your collections as temporal, and so whether those collections are going to be updated daily, weekly, even hourly, or yearly, always from the start of your processes, always imagine that you're going to update them and you're going to update that collection soon. And so what we suggest in that case is a strategy called regenerate and propagate, and that's really just about, for example, each hour, you may take a new snapshot of your data. You may generate your CXML and your DZCs that are current for that particular hour, say, and then you can, so that's the assembly phase we have there. Then you might actually put them onto a staging environment where you might have a set of human eyes make sure that there's nothing that you would not want to go out to production. It's kind of your gate. And then if that meets approval, it can take literally just a couple of minutes then to feed that out to your production system. It might be it might be a CDN. It might just be your normal self-hosted production system. And so you can actually almost completely automate that whole process, with the exception of maybe the checks. So again, this is a pretty complicated topic. We're going to be in the comments afterwards, so we'd love to chat about any individual circumstances you have afterwards. So lastly, I'm sure at least some of you are probably wondering when you can get your hands on Pivot. You can actually get your hands on the Silverlight 4 base version of Pivot in summer 2010, so it's coming pretty soon. Though you can get Pivot, Big Pivot, today and the tools to actually help you start generating collections right now at getpivot.com. We've got the Pivot install. We've got an Excel tool to help you start building simple collections right away. We've got all kinds of documentation, a lot of which we've actually presented today. And then the good news is that any work you put into making collections today is going to be completely portable, with one small exception I'll explain in a second. It's going to be completely portable between the Big Pivot and the Little Pivot, or the Silverlight Pivot experience coming this summer. The one caveat is that Silverlight, the deep zoom experience in Silverlight only supports JPEGs. There's a few other file formats that are supported in Big Pivot that won't be in Little Pivot. So lastly, I think we have a challenge. And that challenge is that we get asked all the time what's the best use of Pivot? And I have to answer that I don't really know. I mean, so far since we've released Pivot, we've had just a tremendous amount of support and enthusiasm from the community, and we hope that continues. We want you to build to use Pivot in ways we never thought of and help us really guide the future of Pivot. And so we have to ask you, what will you make? And we can't wait to see. Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions, but thanks. Let me not stop your applause. Any questions?
So just to clarify, the Pivot itself is a client?
Yes.
And all of this server stuff that's difficult you kind of have to do on a per basis.
So
How you work in automation and generating XML and all that stuff.
yeah, so currently the production pipeline is that the server side of the piece, the gathering of your data. Those are things that aren't really part of the core Pivot package, if you will. Obviously, there's lots of other tools to do that, and if you have scale data needs, chances are you have some pretty specialized ways of doing things already. We don't want to get in the way of that.
Something to note there too is that if you're very, very not technical, you can start writing it in Notepad as well. It's just an XML file. So, from there to the top.
So actually, what I will say though is if you want to make a relatively small collection, and by that I mean maybe a few hundred items, the Excel tool that we have is really great. It simply uses rows and columns together with images, and it's as close to a visual collection builder as we have today. So you can get started that way. It works really great. And people have actually built collections up to a few thousand items, so it does scale. But really, like I say, the sweet spot is for getting started right away with a few hundred items. Yes, that's on getpivot.com now. The question was, that's available now, and indeed it is. Not yet. Not yet. The question was, we can view static images, JPEGs, can we play video? And the answer was, not yet. Yeah, so the question was, if you have data that changes all the time and maybe the whole data set doesn't change, but just a part of the data set changes, do you have to update the whole data set? Well, the sledgehammer approach, and again, I'm not a developer, I'm a program manager, so I get to say this. The sledgehammer approach really is to just go ahead and regenerate the whole collection. Chances are that might actually be more cost effective from a project standpoint than regenerating parts of a collection, but there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't just update a few items, for example. And so, but that would also imply that because a collection is really, I guess, a bounded universe, and that whole universe gets loaded into Pivot, you couldn't simply update a portion of the collection already loaded in Pivot. Does that make sense? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, not directly. So I mean, you would have to. The question was, can I just pull data right out of a database? You can't do that directly today. You'd have to transform the data from whatever native format it's in to our CXML format and then load it into Pivot.
Is that a question at the mic?
Anyway, first of all, I'd like to preface it by saying I'm really excited by the Pivot and everything that's going on. But a lot of data visualization stuff has, in my opinion, and I know there's others that share this opinion, has failed. Like Google Swirl, it's really cool, it's interactive, but whether it actually gets useful is a big question. And so when it comes to business applications, like this is a much better go at data visualization than Google Swirl. But when it comes to data applications, the limitation, first of all, this is a two-part question, but the first part is, do you really see that your average user is going to be able to take this as opposed to a data grid with a list of customers and really find use in it? Obviously you guys do, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. But do you really foresee that this is the change and this is going to be the future of data visualization? And the second part is that the limitation of using images, in the examples that you've shown are great, but when it comes into business applications and you've got real-time data, you can't be batching images and trying to put this data out. Do you guys foresee in the future Pivot that's actually pulling real-time data and using XAML to create graphs or whatever else that you need to show as part of those cards or those pivot items.
So
that was a two-part question, so sorry I kind of mixed the two together.
Right.
you wanna go?
So in terms of data visualization and limitations, we're not seeking to change the business intelligence world with this right now. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right?
Yep.
So I'm not so sure about how to address the question about is it good enough?
Well,
it's experiment right now.
I mean, I'll say that we think that it is. And by the way, one of the things that I'd like to say is, you have something interesting when others use it in ways you never thought of. I'm going to confess, we never thought of using Pivot as a business intelligence tool. Others from the outside have said, I really think we can use this. Like, this brings huge value to my world. And so, rather than us sort of, standing up here and saying, this is the best thing ever, I think that, you might even want to come talk to one of our business intelligence partners who, like I said, will be at the Commons with us. And, you can get their words straight from the horse's mouth, really. Like I said, I'm completely sincere about what I said at the end, which is we really think we're really looking to you guys to help us guide the future of Pivot, to help find the best and highest uses for this experience, and to help us grow and change the experience based on your needs, and that's really what it's all about.
And so then to get back to the second question, which was, do you foresee a future where it's not just images, where you're actually using real-time data and that?
That is definitely true. And I will say that's something that we're actually looking at now. We have nothing to talk about, nothing to announce yet, but essentially having the items themselves that you see in the Pivot collection be interactive on an individual basis, we think would be huge.
That'll be huge once you guys can do that.
Yep. We got about 5 minutes. No, there's no maximum size. I mean, really, you're bound practically. You're really bound by the acceptable time it takes to transfer the data over the wire to the user. You're bound by what you're willing to accept in terms of the user experience. So, for example, the way that Silverlight and Flash and most other graphics animation systems work is they don't get any slower; they just drop frames. So, for example, the experience gets choppy and stuttery and things like that. So, and there's really no way to control that specifically because it has a lot to do with the end user's machine, because all of that crunching is actually happening at the destination and not really at the source. So that's probably a pretty long and maybe slightly evasive way of saying we don't really know what that is. I mean, like I say, there are practical limits. It really, really depends on your scenarios. Know your audience. If it's essentially an end using let's say you're building a retail website and you want to use Pivot, as your catalog browsing experience, chances are you're going to want that to be as fast as you can possibly get it. You're not going to want to load 10,000 items in there. On the other hand, if it's a business intelligence application and you really, like say a buyer really does need to look at a catalog that has 10,000 items in it, you just essentially, you craft that end using, you set expectations appropriately and you craft the experience for that kind of scale.
Internally, we've sort of used 5,000 items as a ceiling.
So much depends on the level of metadata too and the kind. So take for example, one of the ways that, as you saw, transferring those files over HTTP is actually very efficient. It was designed to use compression in mind, and we find that our levels of compression, like over the wire, for example, so if you have a 5 megabyte CXML file, which is a lot of metadata, if you turn compression on in your web server, you can get that down to only 1 meg transferred over the wire. So there's a lot of optimization strategies that you can use. But a lot of it depends on the data. You may have 10,000, 20,000 items in a collection, but they may not have a lot of metadata. On the other hand, you may have only a few hundred items. If they have several hundred words of description each, that's going to make a lot of metadata. So it really depends on the actual content that you built. 3 minutes? Anybody?
What are the experiences for minimum size of your collection? 10, 100, 1,000?
Usually 50 makes it really interesting to create like histograms and find interesting relationships between items. But even still, under 50, a lot depends on the metadata, I found. Yeah, 50 is the magic number, I'd say.
Yeah, so with the smallest collection I think we've built is the U.S. President's collection, and if I'm not mistaken, there's 44 in that collection.
Yeah.
And that actually, that's kind of the lower bound to make it interesting. Any less than that, it starts to feel sparse.
At the same time, though, what you lack in metadata, you can make up for in visuals.
Yes, definitely.
And we did that with the President's collection.
If you have 10 of the most outstanding images ever, that might be enough to make a really great collection.
Yeah.
Anything else? Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, thanks a lot, you guys. Oh, sorry.
What was that one?
One more?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.